Hello, my name is Matthew Wadstein, and in this section, we're going to learn about the Epic Games Launcher. We're going to learn about the launcher itself and the features it gives us as a portal to Unreal Engine 4. We're going to look at the different tabs, like the Community tab, which allows us to interact with the community directly. The Learn tab, it allows us quick access to the documentation and other ways of learning the engine. The Marketplace tab, it allows us to quickly accelerate our project and provides us with free content. The Library tab, it's our primary interface to our engine, our projects, and our vault, which holds items we've purchased and downloaded from the launcher. And then quickly discuss our Modding tab, which is a portal for multiple projects that have been created in the engine that we can use to learn by example. Learning the launcher is a great way to get started with Unreal Engine, as this is the primary interface for your interactions with Unreal Engine 4. The Epic Games Launcher, which you can see here, is going to be our portal to using Unreal Engine 4. Now by default, we're going to get Unreal Engine 4 as one of our available sections, but we're also going to get some of the other projects that Epic Games is working on. If we don't wish to see them, we can click on the gear icon in the top right and hide the game tabs. And this will leave us with just the Unreal Engine section. Now the first part we want to talk about is our community section. This is where we can see what's new. For example, there's a new version coming out. Let's go ahead and talk about it with some of the developers. Maybe one of those articles highlighted will be about a new asset pack that Epic Games is going to release and give to its community to help advance our project. Maybe some people have created some nice things and we want to give inspiration. So here's the Spotlight projects. And we have some activity that's going on. Some things happening in like the Answer Hub or maybe the forum. Now the Answer Hub and the forum and those other community sections, there's some quick links to them at the top. Now if you go to them, you'll find things such as this. This is the Answer Hub. This is where you can ask other developers questions and they can give you feedback, hopefully answering your problem. Or you could always go through and see if other people have encountered issues that you know how to deal with and give them the answers to help them out. The forum is a great place just to chat with other community members. You can find out what's going on with the engine, with the community, and maybe find some things that will help you out with your current project. The roadmap is a good place to find out what has gone into the engine in the past, what is going into the engine in the future, as well as some ideas about what they may want later in the future. Keep in mind this is just a roadmap. These are going to be things that aren't guaranteed to go in at any time. Lastly, we have our blog. This is where Epic Games can post things that they find interesting for its community. Hey, we have a new version coming out. Go ahead and read up on it. Here's Datasmith and how it can help you in your project in the future. Or NVIDIA has an Edge program partnered with Unreal Engine. Check out the winners for last month. Things like that. Next on our launcher, we have our Learn tab. This is where we want to go if we want to learn more about the engine. We have access to tutorials as well as sample resources. You can quickly see at the top, we have some things like getting started with Unreal Engine 4 or a programmer quick start if you want to jump right in. Below that, there are some sample projects. Now these are full-fledged projects you can open up inside the engine and see how things work. Now these are engine feature samples. So for example, how would we create a cinematic using Sequencer? We have an example for that. Maybe a VR demo. There's an example for that. Maybe something like, well, how would I make some water? Well, there's a project for that you can take apart and look and see how it's created. There's some more specific concepts. How would you do multiplayer? Well, here's a multiplayer example. Or how might I do user interface? Well, there's a user interface example. And then there's more full-fledged game projects. For example, using VR, you have a Couch Nights demo on how a full game is created using VR. Or you have the Unreal Match 3, which is a full mobile game with in-app purchases that you can take apart and learn from. Below this, we can find the Marketplace tab. This is where we can go to look for assets that we can use in our projects, as well as sell to other people. You can find a great many things here. One thing that's nice is if you search for Epic Games in the top right search bar, you can find Epic Games released content. Now, these are free items that Epic Games is giving any of its users of the engine for use in their projects. You can get some grass and rocks, for example, from an open world demo collection, some default starter animations from the animation starter pack, or other items as you can see available here. The library tab is going to be one of the more important tabs that we use. This is where we can see which engine versions we have installed. For example, I have .17, .18, and .19 preview installed, and as you can see, all of them are working side by side. The launcher will allow you to download, and it will manage multiple versions of the engine installed at the same time. Under that, we have my projects. So you can see, for example, I have 2 copies of the content examples, but one is geared for engine .18 and one is geared for engine .19. Now, if you want to modify some of the settings on your engines, you can click the down arrow and go to options, and you'll see the available options that you can change. Let's say I'm creating a project in .18 and I'm not going to target, for example, HTML5. I can uncheck this and I can save myself some space. And it's handy if you want to clean up some of your storage on your device. Lastly, we have our vault at the bottom section. This is where items from our marketplace and our library and our learn all come together. So for example, if I download the content examples from the learn tab, it comes into my vault and I can create a new project for learning. Let's say I get something from the marketplace, like an Infinity Blade asset pack. It goes down here and I can add those items to a new project. Now lastly, and it's hidden currently, if we go back into our gear and uncheck hide game tabs, we have our modding tab. Our modding tab is a great place to learn from existing content. These are all custom engine versions created for these different games here, where you can go in and see how things were created. So if I go to my Robo Recall and launch it, I will come up with this. Here's a custom engine version showcasing how to mod the Robo Recall game. And I can actually go through and see how different effects were created, meshes were created, code was actually put together to create this project. It's a great way to learn directly from the launcher. The launcher itself is your primary portal. It's your interface into working with the engine. So learning it, learning the different parts, and knowing how to get around it is a great way to start your learning process with Unreal Engine 4. And with that, we're going to go and wrap up the section for the Epic Games Launcher. Well, what did we learn? We learned the features of the launcher. The launcher being the primary interface for interacting with Unreal Engine 4. You get to interact with the community. It's a quick and easy way to learn things and check out the documentation. It's a primary portal for the marketplace, so we can quickly accelerate our projects. We can manage our projects and the items we've downloaded in the library tab. And then we have our modding tab, which is a great way to quickly get in and look at how other people have created things in the engine. Once we've done that though, where do we go now? Well, we can look at things like the projects and the templates, learn how to create new projects, and quickly accelerate using templates. We can learn the editor interface, where the different sections are inside of our editor, and how we'd interact with them to work on our projects. Or dive into the documentation itself on the Unreal Engine documentation page. At this point, you should pick a subject that interests you and dive right into it so you can learn some more about Unreal Engine 4. Hello, my name is Matthew Wadstein, and in this section we're going to learn about projects and templates. The first thing we're going to do is learn about managing our projects. We're going to work on finding them. Where are they located in the launcher generally, and how would we work with them? How can we organize them, and how would we work on creating new projects? So in that case, we're going to work on getting started with creating them. Using templates. What are templates, and which templates do we have available to us? Our starter content, why would we use it and what is it? As well as adding in future feature packs once we have a project created. We have a little extra bonus video covering the basics of project settings. Basically, once you've created a new project, what are some of the default settings? What are some of them you commonly change? And which ones are important to know about? With this said, projects are integral. They are the key to working with Unreal Engine. So let's get started learning them. When we want to start working with projects, we're going to use the Epic Games Launcher. We're going to go to the Library tab, and then we can choose to launch our engine version so we can start managing our projects. When we launch it, we're going to be presented with our Unreal Project browser. Now from here we have a few things we can do. We can open up an existing project by clicking on it and clicking open, or double clicking. Now if we try to do that with a newer project, for example 4.19, and I'm using 4.18 for the engine, it's going to say no, you can't do that, I don't understand it. If you want to open up an older version, we're going to get a few options. Primarily you're going to want to open a copy. This is going to take the existing project, create a copy, it's going to give it the new version number for the copy, and it's going to convert it over and open it up in the new version. Now, if you don't want to do that, maybe you have space issues or you have another backup system in place, you have access to more options, and you can either convert it in place, so it's the same thing as before, but it won't make the copy, or you can skip conversion, where it'll just simply open up the project and attempt to use it in the new version. None of your assets are going to be converted over to the latest engine version, so you may run into problems. By default, open a copy is what they recommend, and it's probably what should be used for safety. Now, if you want to go ahead and pick another project that maybe you haven't opened up before in this version, you can browse, find that project, and open it up, and it'll open up in that version. Now we do have the Marketplace quick link, as well as the ability to search for any projects you may want to look for by the name. The last additional thing on here is our New Projects tab. This is where we would go to create new projects, and that will be covered in our next chapter. Once you launch your engine and you're presented with the project browser, when we want to create a new project, we're going to click on the New Project tab, and we'll be presented with all of our options. I'm going to maximize this so we can go ahead and see easier. And the first thing we're going to do is choose a template, if we want to use that as a starting point. Templates are pre-built projects that we can use to accelerate the development of our project. For example, let's say I wanted to create an architectural visualization. I could click on the third-person project. This is going to give me a third-person character, a mannequin that I can follow around using a third-person camera and easily move them and control the camera for maybe walking through a building. It's a great way to start off without having to code your own systems. Now you do have two primary options. You have Blueprint or C++. Blueprint is the built-in visual scripting language in Unreal Engine 4. It's a great way for non-programmers to do some programming type stuff. C++ is your traditional code-based coding system. They are both interchangeable, and you can change and add later, so don't worry if you happen to think you might have chosen the wrong one. We're going to start with third person, and then we'll move down to our settings. These are the default settings when you first start up your project. It's where you're going to target. If I want to target a desktop or console, then I may want to choose the desktop console. The other option is mobile or tablet. Maximum quality for your graphics, or scalable 3D or 2D. These are changeable after you have started up your project. This is just your defaults. So go ahead and try to choose what you're going to aim for your end goal. The next option is starter content. Starter content is a collection of resources, audio files, some blueprints for scripting purposes, some textures like grass or bricks, some meshes like walls and doors to quickly accelerate development in the beginning of your project. We're going to go ahead and include the starter content. Lastly, you'll need to choose where you want the project stored and your name for it. Let's say I want to call this third person project. We're perfectly okay. Something you need to note is Unreal Engine prefers alphanumeric when you're naming your folder and your project itself. If you try to use something else, let's say an exclamation point or a period, it's going to let you know only certain names are allowed. So go ahead and just try to avoid that. Once we create a project, Unreal Engine is going to spin up and it's going to start doing things needed to create that project. Importing any templates, importing any starter content. Going to compile shaders, it's going to create the derived data cache where it stores frequently used things, and you may notice the engine itself might hitch at certain points. 45% is common, 83% is common. Just depends if you've ever opened up the engine before, and if you have a speedy computer, maybe something a little slower or old. But after a bit of time, it's going to go ahead and start up your project with all of your settings that you've chosen. Now we created this with a template. As you can see here, I actually have a little scene. I have a little character. If I was to go ahead and hit play, you can see that I can move around my character. And we have a nice little start to a possible architectural visualization simulation from our template. There's also a nice little overview if you click the play button here on this tutorial, where it'll tell you all about the features you get from using this template. Starter content was also included. There we'll find a starter content folder, and as you can see in here, we have some things, like I mentioned, some shapes, maybe some meshes that we might want to use for our buildings, some walls, maybe some materials and some textures, some grass and things like that. We actually have a map included with the starter content. You can go in there and go into the starter map under the map folder, and it's going to show you some things that are included with the starter content. Now there is a couple things to note. First of all, starter content takes about 500 megabytes or so on your disk, so you might not want to include it with every project if you just simply don't need it. Second of all, feature packs. Feature packs are basically templates that can be added after the fact. So if we go to Add New, Add Feature or Content Pack, we're presented with our Blueprint feature packs, our C++ feature packs, and then our content packs. And our content packs are our starter content. You'll notice we have a mobile starter content here. It is basically the same thing as our starter content, but optimized for mobile. It's about a fifth of the size, and it takes up much less memory because things are more optimized for mobile devices. You can easily just choose a feature or a content pack and tell it to add to project. So for example, let's say I wanted to add flying to this as well. I could do add to project, and you now have our flying section with our flying template inside of our project. And with that, that is the basics of how to manage projects, create projects, and then what options you have available to us when you're working with projects for the first time. Once we have our new project created, we are able to then adjust any project settings. When we created the new project, we were able to choose what we wanted for the defaults, the scalability, and our target. If we go to Edit, Project Settings, we'll be presented with our project settings. Now, there are quite a lot of things inside of here to cover, and all of those things are covered in detail inside the Unreal documentation. However, here are some important things that you may wish to know about when you're first starting out. The target hardware is where we set up our initial settings. We chose desktop console and maximum quality. This is where you are able to adjust this after the fact. All of these settings, for example, we go to desktop console, mobile tablet, all of these settings are explained here on what will and will be turned on and off, what will be modified, for example. These are individually changed in different sections inside of our project. For example, we have something like use mouse for touches enabled, which is in the engine input section. If we go over to engine input, we can find that option, use mouse for touch. All these do is quickly allow us to change for a target. All these are explained in detail in the appropriate sections. Here you can see, for example, since we're going for a mobile or a tablet, we're going to allow our mouse to emulate touch input. We're going to disable things like exposure and motion blur, things that are heavier on our mobile or tablet device. And we're going to make things like split screen disabled because you don't usually use that on a mobile or tablet device. Any of the options you change, again, it will explicitly label what's changed, and then when you're done, you can just restart the editor or apply them. If you want to know what any of these do individually, feel free to just browse to the appropriate section. Engine rendering, for example, project maps and modes, you can see them all here, and you'll get more of a detail on what they do. Other important parts in here are things such as our maps and modes. This is where we create our starting point for when someone starts the game. You have your startup map. This is the map that happens when you are in the editor. And then you have the default map, which is the map that loads when you're in the game. This way you can have a sandbox, for example, when you start editing, but you actually have your main menu or wherever your startup is for the game itself when you have someone playing. Other basics like your split screen, whether or not you have different game instances, your game mode, which is covered separately. All the basic important things are covered in your maps and modes. Packaging covers what is included in your project when you package it. Supported platforms is a quick and easy way to choose which platforms you wish to support with this project. If you're not going to support one project, for example, we don't wish to support HTML5, If we disable it, we'll no longer have the option to build out to HTML5, and anything associated with HTML5 will be removed as an option. These are just quick and simple settings for your project that you may wish to know about when you first start a new project. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our projects and templates section. So what did we learn? We learned to manage and create new projects. While creating those new projects, we learned about templates and feature packs. They help us quickly accelerate our project. We learned about starter content. Again, quickly accelerating our project, getting it going and running right off the ground. And then we briefly looked at project settings, some of the common settings for the project that we might want to modify once we start up our new project. Now, where should we go from here? One of the first things we should do is learning our editor interface. Now that we have a project, how do we actually manipulate and work with all of our content inside of our editor? And then we should learn about the important files. These are files and folders that are important to a project that we may wish to modify later on. With that said, go ahead and pick a subject that you find interested and start learning. Hello, my name is Matthew Wadstein, and welcome to the section on important files and folders in your project in Unreal Engine 4. We're going to look at things like the U project file itself, the features of it, as well as how we might want to edit it in case we run into a problem in the future. We have the actual folder structure itself for the project. What is the basic structure? Also, what files and folders are disposable? Which ones won't we need in case we need to give this to someone else? Our cached downloads. When our launcher downloads items from our Learn tab in our marketplace, where are they at? Once we know where they're at, how can we manage them both from the disk as well as the launcher itself? And our DDC folders. Well, what is a DDC? It's our derived data cache. And it's a useful way of speeding up the startup time on our projects and allowing other people to gain the benefits when we learn how to manage them. We also learn how to move them if needed and how to get rid of them to save space. So let's go ahead and let's get started. The U project file in Unreal Engine 4 is a text file. It contains the basic settings of how this project interacts with the engine. If we were to open it up, for example with Notepad, we're going to find it's a text file. And you can see this project, the engine version is 4.18 and it has no other basic settings. This is my basic project where I haven't really changed anything. Now, a few options you have if you right click on the U project is you can launch the game. If we launch the game this way, it's basically going to take the existing project itself and run it with the associated engine version, and we're going to end up with a running project. Now, this isn't built, it isn't cooked, it isn't staged, it isn't saved out, it isn't compressed. It's just taking it like we're running it through the editor, except we're running it through the command line, and we're not playing it in editor. Another option is to switch Unreal Engine version. Now, this is handy if you need to change the version. However, this doesn't go through and update assets. It doesn't say, hey, for example, right now we're on 4.18, and I want to change to 4.17. Let's go ahead and change all those assets to work with the older version. Assets by default are usually not backwards compatible. They have versioning inside of them, and they're going to work with that version forward, not backwards. Here's my project in 4.18 before I switched it over. And you can see I have some things in here. We have some shapes, we have some textures. Down here under my UFO game demo, under blueprints, well, we have some blueprints in this folder. Now, if I close this, I've changed this over to 4.17. So if we open this in Notepad, we can see that. We'll go ahead and open up the U project file. When we double clicking it, opens the associated version, in this case 4.17.2. And once it opens up, we're going to see pretty much the same thing. The difference being, now that we're running in 4.17 for our engine, anything associated with later versions like 4.18, 4.19, etc. will no longer show up. So if we go back here and we look at, for example, our starter content and we go to textures, well, our textures show up. These are saved in older compatible versions. They're from our starter content, so they work fine. If you can see up here on the top right, we are in 4.17. If we go down to our UFO game demo blueprints, well, you notice these folders are now empty. They're not empty on the disk. If we right click and show and explore, we actually can see the U asset files here. They're empty in the editor because the editor expects 4.17 or older compatibility, and these are saved in 4.18, therefore not compatible. Our editor simply doesn't show it. So if you're going to change the version of your engine that is associated with your project, keep in mind this isn't a fix for making certain things show up, and it's not a way to go back. You want to make copies the normal way by opening it in the browser and making a copy in place. Now our third option is going to be generating Visual Studio project files. In this case, we get an error. We don't have any source code, and that's correct. There's no source folder here. If we go into our C++ project, we can actually see now we have a source folder, and if we were to right click and generate, it's going to create the solution file from the source code and create a new update everything to work appropriately. So if we delete this, for example, we're going to open up our U project, and you can see we have a few other things in here. We have our modules. That tells us which source code we're going to associate with this project. You can see new project CPP, new project CPP. So this allows us to compile those modules when we create the solution file. And we can see the platforms that it targets. So if we go back, we can right click and generate Visual Studio files. It's going to go through, it's going to grab any modules, any targets, any source code associated with the project, create our solution file, and then we'd be able to open that up with our Visual Studio version that we have chosen. Now you did notice I went in there and I was able to open with Notepad. You can edit these by hand. Usually you won't. Usually the only time you want to edit these by hand is if you maybe need to enable or disable something. For example, we have our plugins. In this case, I have a plugin installed for 4.18. If we were to go ahead and open up our third-person project and enable that plugin, our U project folder, U project file, is going to update itself and show that we now have that plugin as one of our valid options when we start up this project. If you ever run into the case where you need to edit or remove a plugin, or you don't have a plugin installed, editing the U project text file is a way to resolve this. So if we go into our plugins and we have Substance, we'll go and enable it and restart. This will restart our project with that new plugin enabled. And if we were to go back to our U project file, we should be able to open it up with Notepad. We now find we have a new plugins section. You can also see enabled true and enabled false here. Well, let's say, for example, we have our project and we have our project running, but we no longer have access to the Substance plugin. Let's say, for example, we're going to update. We want to now run this in 4.19, which is in preview. I'll switch it over to 4.19, and I'll go ahead and run the project. It's going to look through the U project file. It's going to see, hey, we need the Substance plugin. Oh, wait, you don't have that. Do you want to download it? Well, if we tell it yes, we're going to go to the marketplace, and if we go to the marketplace for the Substance plugin, which is right here, you're going to find we don't have 4.19 as an option because it's in preview right now, and we don't have that as a plugin. So therefore, we can't really open up this project with that plugin because we're going to get an error. We can easily go in, open it with Notepad. We can remove the entire plugin section or just disable it if we want to. And now if we open up our U project, it's going to look through. It's going to say, hey, open this with 4.19. You have no plugins. You have no source code. Let's just go ahead and start the engine and run this project inside the engine. And then after a few moments, it'll go ahead and start up. And that is it. That is the basics of our U project file. Again, it's a text file. It's basically controlling how our engine works with this project, the version, the plugins, the modules for C++, which supported platforms, and other items like that. In this section, we're going to cover important project files and folders. So let's get started. This is our third-person project. Inside of our folder, we're going to find a few more folders and a project file. The project file is important. If you get rid of it, you pretty much don't have the basics of your project anymore. Our configuration folder is important. This controls and contains project-specific settings. In this case, I have a default input that I've modified inside of my engine to add a new input. If I was to delete this INI file or delete this configuration folder, the next time I start up my project, I'd no longer have those settings. Our content folder is our content folder. It contains all the content for our project. You can see here we have things like our flying and our geometry, which match our flying and our geometry inside of our content folder inside of our project. You should not delete this folder or you'd lose all your content. Additional folders in here were things like our collections and our developers, which can be accessed if we're in our content browser by showing collections or showing developer content. And they're places to put things such as shortcuts and scratch files when you're working on your project. You should not get rid of them. The next is our intermediate folder. This can be gotten rid of. This is just holding temporary things that are used in the intermediate step when you're building your project and when you're using the engine. If you get rid of this, your project will take a little longer to start up next time because it has to recreate this. But it will recreate it every time, and it will recreate the missing objects if you delete this folder. Our save folder is basically the same thing, but it holds some more important files we may not want to get rid of unless we're sure of. These things will be recreated as needed, but we cannot recreate what was in here once we delete it. For example, we have our logs folder, which contains our running log of our game, our older version as well as our current one, and it's useful for things like crashing and stuff like that. We also have backups and autosaves. In the case your map crashes or the engine crashes, you can come back in here and recover things. The engine itself will also look through your save folder and try to recover things if needed on a crash. Now this is a blueprint project. We have no C++ code. If we go into my C++ project here, we see a few more folders. I actually see one more file as well. Our solution file for Visual Studio can be deleted. It will be recreated when we run our U project the next time and it detects there are modules and it will recreate it. Our VS folder is specific to Visual Studio. We can delete it if we need to. It's just holding temporary data for like autocomplete and things like that. Binaries is a temporary folder. It contains, if we go into it, our compiled binary code, our DLL file associated with our module, which is our C++ source. That is created every time you compile a project. Feel free to get rid of it if you want to save space. The next time you need it, it will recreate it. It's also useful to get rid of that if you maybe have some weird issues, things aren't packaging properly, kind of resetting your project back to scratch. We've covered config and content, intermediate and saved. Our last is our source folder. This is our source folder for the C++ files in our project. If you get rid of this, well, you're no longer going to be able to have any C++ source code in your project, and it's not going to compile properly. If you run into a problem, let's say you have a project where you have a C++ file or something's not working properly, or you need to change something, or maybe you try to reset it, you can technically delete your source folder. You could edit your U project file in Notepad and get rid of your modules, and you can kind of reset it back to a blueprint only project. But if you're working on this properly, it's not recommended. Your source folder should stay. It is a required folder. There are additional folders and files that can be inside your project based on the type of project, but they are not required. Your required folders to recreate your project properly are going to be your config, your content, your source, and then any files inside of the actual project directory itself. If you'd like more information on this, refer to the documentation for the directory structure so you can get more information on what each folder does and the requirements for a proper project. In this section, we're going to cover the downloads, the cached downloads for our vault. Our vault being items we download from our Epic Games launcher from like our Learn tab or the Marketplace. We can see the vault here and the items I have contained, as well as the amount of space it takes up on the disk. Now, just because something's in your vault doesn't mean it's actually downloaded. You only download things, for example, when you wish to create a project or install it to the engine. And then, even then, it'll ask you which version you wish to update or download as needed. If we go to the setting up here, the little cog icon, and choose Edit Vault Cache Location, this will show us where the default cache is at. And by default, it's going to be where the launcher is in the Vault Cache folder. Now if you want, you can browse and you can find a different folder, maybe a different drive that is meant for storing things rather than a smaller SSD, and you can change your cache location and it'll go ahead and change it. But let's say we want to go ahead and look inside of there, see what's inside of there, and manage things. Well, here's my vault cache, and we can notice a few things. You'll notice it stores folders, and those folders will contain the packages that you've downloaded, and they're actually versioned depending on how you've downloaded and what you've downloaded. In this case, you can see I have the content examples for both 4.15, 4.17, and 4.18. I actually have the same content in 3 different versions pre-downloaded. If we look at that, the actual content itself is about 4 gigabytes each. So that's taking up a good large amount of space that I may not need anymore. If we look in here, I don't have 4.15 installed. So I may not need the content examples for 4.15. So I could go in here and I could delete them, and it'll go ahead and remove it from my drive, and I no longer have that available. If we were to go to our content examples, we can see we can also remove the content from here. If I was to create a project, it asks you where you want to create it and which version, and this is where the cache comes in handy. For example, if I want to create a version 4.18 or 4.17, it's going to go ahead and look through my vault cache, see if I have the up-to-date versions of those, and then pull it off the disk. If not, I'll have to re-download it and save it in my cache. If you want to remove, we already mentioned that before, I can just click here, remove local content. Now the Showdown VR demo is no longer on my drive. And you can see I now only have 11.6 gigabytes stored. That's it. That is the basics. That is our vault cache. That's where it stores items from our launcher. That's how we would work with it and find it. That's how we can move it, and that's how we can add and remove things from it if needed. The Derived Data Cache, or the DDC, is a cache that stores versions of your assets in the specific format that is used by Unreal Engine for the target platform. These are files that are different than the source files, or the files that the artist has brought in. If you look in the bottom right hand corner, you'll see that it's compiling shaders, and it's been doing it for about 30 seconds. What that was doing was taking those source files and converting them to the appropriate format and storing them in the Derived Data Cache. So now you'll notice we have our project looking proper, all of our materials are compiled, our shaders look good, we no longer have that message. Our project is loaded and ready to go. If we were to close it down and start it back up, what it's going to do is it's going to go through, find the appropriate Derived Data Cache for the engine version we're using, find the appropriate Derived Data Cache for any of the files we might want to load up, our assets, and use those instead so it doesn't have to convert them every time. This is our folder for our Derived Data Cache. On Windows, it's under App Data, Local, Unreal Engine. Every platform has its own default directory. Now our project is going to load up here, and once it loads up, you'll notice we are where we stopped. We no longer have to compile shaders, we're ready to go. It basically sped up the starting time so our project loaded faster. Now, if we were going to go ahead and look through that folder, we're going to go ahead and find a few things. We have a directory for each of our engine versions, and then we have a common directory. I only have 3 versions of the engine installed now. I don't have 4.16 anymore. So I'm free to go ahead and delete this if I'm sure I will no longer need it. Now, even if I didn't know for sure, if I reinstalled .16, the next time it started up, it would recreate the appropriate files it needs. The Derived Data Cache will recreate itself and keep itself updated as needed. Now that's important to know. If we were to open these up, for example, and look at the properties, we're looking at about 500 megabytes. It's not too much, but I haven't really loaded up much content. With a larger project, it's going to get larger and larger. As you add and remove things, you might have some stale items in there. For example, we have some cache from a project we no longer use, but it's still sitting on our drive. If you are concerned about that, feel free to delete all of the files. They will be recreated the next time you start it up from the original source assets. This is just something that is not required to be there. It will recreate it when the engine needs it. One thing to note though is this is very handy if you are working in a project where there are multiple people. So let me go ahead and open up the documentation page for the Drive Data Cache, which we can find in the documentation for Unreal Engine under Drive Data Cache. And you could just search for Drive Data Cache and find this file. All the information we talked about is in here, along with more information such as how to change where the Drive Data Cache is stored on your local drive. If you follow these instructions, you can change where it's stored, and that will allow you to move it. For example, from your C drive to a D drive, off of maybe an SSD to something else, we no longer have to worry about storage concern. The nice thing about that is that folder, since it's configurable, can then be shared. You can have an entire group of people working on the project. They can share the same DDC, and it will lower the amount of time needed for shader compiling and project loading. For example, an artist may commit a bunch of work. It will compile all the shaders that one time for the artist, commit it to the Drive Data Cache, and now anyone else who's loading up that project will gain that benefit. There are other things inside this document. Feel free to read them if you would like. Ways of doing other things like building it out by hand or distributing it if need be. But that is the basics of the Drive Data Cache. It is where Unreal Engine stores items to make your project load faster. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the important files and folders in Unreal Engine 4. So what did we learn? Well, we learned about the U project file. We learned about the basic layout of the project folder and which files and folders may not be necessary. We learned about cache downloads, where the launcher places these downloads and how we can edit them later, as well as the DDC files and folders, where we might have them stored and how we might want to clean them up later to save space if needed. Where should we go from here? At this point, you might want to look into learning about the editor interface, how everything is done inside the editor, how the windows work together, and how we can manipulate items inside of our project, as well as diving into the documentation itself. The documentation on the Unreal Engine website is a great place to start looking for something you might want to learn. And with that said, the next thing you should work on is something important to you. Pick a topic that you want to learn and start learning it.